On today's episode of the John Campea Show podcast, it looks like The Office is getting a reboot with the original showrunner attached to it as well. Also, Martin Scorsese, remember when he said like comic book films and franchise films aren't cinema? Well, he's kind of doubling down on that now. We're going to discuss that. Also, there are reports coming out that Target is actually completely removing their DVD and Blu-ray offerings in select locations. And in case you didn't hear, the WGA and studios have reached a tentative agreement. The writer's strike could be over. That and a whole bunch more. The John Campea Show podcast starts right now. Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the best damn movie-related show on the planet Earth, the John Campea Show podcast, coming to you from right here in our quaint little studio, brought to you in part by our friends at Mint Mobile. I'm, of course, your host, John Campea, and it is an awesome honor and privilege, as it is every day, to have you, our international friends, gather around as we talk about our favorite things in the world, movies, well, as long as it's not Expendables 4, movie news, TV, and streaming, and all sorts of good stuff. Joining me in studio here today, we got Ray Ora.
Hey, what's up, everyone?
We got Jonathan Voico.
Good day.
We got the writer, director, producer extraordinaire, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett.
Hello.
And most importantly, you guys are here. Thank you so much for being here and making this show part of your day. And here's how it's going to go. We're going to start off by talking about those topics that I listed off, and then we're going to go over and take questions from our YouTube channel members. Also, want to remind you guys, if you happen to be checking this out on YouTube, we actually do this as a podcast, and you can check out our audio-only podcast feed because you can't always have a YouTube video in front of you. Maybe you're driving, maybe you're at the gym, maybe you're at work, whatever. So go and subscribe to our podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app of choice. Just search for the John Campea Show podcast. All right. What a weekend. Some big things. First of all, the Deion Sanders Colorado bubble burst. I don't know what the final score was. When I checked out as it was getting into the fourth quarter, they were losing 42-0. Oh. Miami Dolphins put up a 70 burger, 70-20. So they won their game. Expendables 4 blowing up the box office with $8 million at the box office. I'm sorry. I don't like to celebrate the failure of anything. It's just that, man, I really didn't like it. It was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And also, it looks like the WGA strike is coming to an end. And who won that thing? We're going to discuss all of that here today. So let's get things started with topic number one, shall we? And that one is this. You know, for ages, people have been asking for The Office to return. I don't know if you guys remember, Steve Carell, not too awful long ago, was actually hosting Saturday Night Live. And even on that, they had some of the original cast members in the audience, and they had to do a bit on it about that. When are we doing The Office again? When are we doing The Office again? And we heard last year, do you remember this? There was, I think Australia was doing a version of The Office, but instead of a paper company, it was like a gift wrapping company or something like that. Well, according to reports now coming out, it looks like The Office is going to return. They're calling it a reboot, but remember that Frasier relaunching that they're doing? They originally called that a reboot as well. So people are using the terms differently. So I don't know if this is going to be an all new cast. I don't know if this is going to have some of the original cast members. I don't know if it's going to be like, it's going to be Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. I don't know if it's going to be like the Australian one. There's no details coming out. But the report is now out, and that the original showrunner, this is the important thing. This isn't just some quick knockoff. The original showrunner of the North American version of The Office with Steve Carell, Greg Daniels, is the guy coming back to run it and to put it all together. Now, I think one of the big key things here determining how excited I'm going to be is this like Frasier in the sense that you're bringing back the main person and maybe one or two cast members will make appearances, whatever. Another show that did something like that recently was the Saved by the Bell, whatever they called it, Saved by the Bell Netflix, where, I mean, it was new characters, but they also had some of the existing characters. Or is this like a pure reboot, like the A-Team movie, where it was just like, it's a whole new bunch of people playing the same roles? I don't know, because listen, The Office tried, I don't know if you remember this, Rob, The Office tried to do 2 spin-off shows. They were developing what was it going to be called? Schrute Farms. Mm-hmm. They were trying to do a Dwight with, what was his cousin's name?
Mo.
Mose. Yeah, cousin Mose. So there's going to be Dwight Schrute. That never actually happened. And then they also tried to do a spinoff with Karen. She was the one played by Rashida Jones. When they tried to do a spinoff of her, that when she left the Dunder Mifflin Scranton office and she went to another branch, they were going to do a spinoff of that branch. That never happened. But people have been asking for this for a long time. And Rob, I'll tell you what, the thing that keeps me interested here, before knowing whether this is a reboot or a relaunch reboot, whatever it is the fact that Greg Daniels himself is on board. And that gives me some hope that maybe we could have a couple of the actual characters from the original show, whether it's Steve Carell or I doubt we're going to see John Krasinski in there. He's pretty busy these days, but maybe he can pop up now and again. I don't know. What do you think about this news and what stands out to you?
Well, look, I mean, being the Office virgin that I am, I would say that the thing about The Office is it's really gone down in history as one of the great comedies of all time.
A lot of people will say it's number one as their favorite sitcom ever.
100%. And I think that it's a show that can stay relevant as you know, after the pandemic. Not many people go into the office that used to go into offices.
Right.
But office life is inherently sort of always, I think, a fertile ground for comedy. At least, and I think that as the times change and as office politics change, the fact that it's comedic doesn't change. And I think that absolutely, you could probably keep a version of The Office going until the end of time. Really,
yeah.
What the show relies on is the talent, the people in front of that camera. Of course, the writing as well. But you know, I mean, Steve Carell, half of what he did in that show is his face, you know, and the tone. I mean, it was, well, I remember we watched the second episode of the show, which was the something day. What's it called?
Diversity,
dude.
That episode.
I mean, I was
good.
physically uncomfortable watching Diversity Day when you showed it to me for the first time. And I'm like, man, and yet there's such truth in it. You know, that was the thing. The Office was hilarious because it was true. And even though it was over the top, it was so just, it was hilarious but uncomfortable at the same time. And I just, man, I mean, you introduced me to it, and I just think that it's probably a good idea to do this.
You know what's funny? A lot of people today will say you couldn't do that show today. But I would argue that they would have said the same thing about the show when it came out.
Yes.
That you couldn't do the show. It was all about how they did it.
Yeah.
And like when they do things that you could, when they do certain topics, and if you just look at the topic on paper, you say that could be potentially be really, really offensive. But when you realize how they would do it, it would be absolutely unbelievable. Like the gaydar episode, when Dwight and Michael were trying to root out who else in the office could be gay. If you just look at that on paper, you could think, well, that has the potential to be really, really offensive. But it's the way they navigate. It was all about the characters and stuff like that. You talked about Steve Carell's face, how he did that. The other thing that really made this show was a subtle little thing, and I don't know if this was a part of the English show or not, but John Krasinski's utter disbelief turned to the camera.
Yeah, that came from the BBC.
Did that come from the BBC
Yep.
one? But Krasinski nailed it. So it would be this thing where, like, let's say Rob was like, we're doing a reality show in here and we're supposed to be doing a documentary or whatever. And let's say Rob says something completely outrageous or whatever. And I'm looking at him, but then like Jim would just go like just like that. And you know what? They must have done that move literally 1,000 times during the run of the series, and it never got old.
It was Martin Freeman played that role in the BBC.
That's right. And whenever they would use that turn to the camera, I said like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? It never got old. It played right through to the last episode. I really hope they're able to but listen, they got the original showrunner, even if it is a whole new cast of characters. I got a lot of trust in this.
Yes.
All right. Guys, with that down, let's move on to this, shall we? Some of you may know that the world's biggest comic book movie fan is Martin Scorsese. Woo. Oh, wait, no, that's wrong. There hasn't been anybody as outspoken against comic book movies than Martin Scorsese. And let me rephrase, the great Martin Scorsese, because this dude is unbelievable. Like, he will go down on the Mount Rushmore. He is one of the greatest to ever do it. He's got a new one coming out, Killers of the Flower Moon, which I am so excited to see. He is absolutely one of the best that we've ever had. However, he's also not been afraid to stir the pot a little bit. You guys will remember back in 2019, he came out, turning off a lot of film fans with comments about how comic book movies aren't real cinema. It's like, what? And listen, the smartest, best, Michael Jordan threw up air balls once in a while. Greatest of all time, he would throw up air balls sometimes, right? He would. He threw air balls up. And, even the best of the best of the best are going to have a bad day. I think that was a really bad interpretation of the situation that it came on. Well, a lot of time has come, and you knew reporters will keep asking him about it. And in promoting his new film that he's got coming out, Killers of the Flower Moon, he kind of decided to double down a little bit again when somebody brought it up to ask him about it. And he made two big points that I want to give some counters to. But this is what Martin Scorsese said. He said, the theaters have to step up to make them places where people will want to go and enjoy themselves or want to go and see something that moves them. If Hollywood makes nothing but comic book and franchise movies, now he's not just talking about comic book, he's talking about franchises. If Hollywood makes nothing but comic book and franchise movies, and certain segments of the audience don't want to see those films, then nothing is going to get them into a cinema. The danger there is what it's doing to our culture. Because there are going to be generations now that think movies are only those. That's what movies are. All right. Right at the outset, the first thing I would say if I was Martin Scorsese's agent or whatever, it's like, look, there are a lot of movie fans out there who are fans of franchises and fans of Star Wars, fans of Harry Potter, fans of comic book movies. There are a lot of people out there. What are you gaining by disenfranchising those people? What are you gaining by alienating those people? Because Martin Scorsese's had some controversy in his life and career, sure, but never has something come up where I remember, Rob, you remember this in 2019. A lot of people were suddenly saying like, F Martin Scorsese and blah, blah, blah. Like when have we ever heard people say that, right? All because, and I don't care, he doesn't like comic book movies, he doesn't like franchises, that's fine. Nobody has to like that stuff. But as a filmmaker himself, I don't know what the advantage was of alienating a bunch of people saying that. Now, I want to look at this statement by him specifically, because there are two things he says that are true. However, I want to offer two counters to his points. Let's go back and look at the quote again here. He says, you got to make movies, people want to go to see something that moves them. And if Hollywood makes nothing but comic book franchise movies, there are certain segments of the audience that won't want to go see those films. Okay, he's not wrong. Newsflash. People who don't like comic book movies aren't going to go see comic book movies. Okay, yeah, I agree with that 100%. He's not wrong. And he's also not wrong in saying, if Hollywood makes nothing but comic book and franchise movies, by the way, still today, those are the minority of the films that come out. I know it feels like they're the majority, but they're not. They're actually in the large minority, comic book movies and franchise films. But if you make nothing but those, there's going to be a bunch of people that don't come to the cinema. Absolutely right. Well, my counter to that is this. If all you put out are Killers of the Flower Moon type of movies, there's a lot of people that won't go to the cinemas. I mean, you're right. If you only put out one kind of movie, that means there's going to be a bunch of people that don't go. I agree. You're not wrong, but it works the other way around too. If you just put out cop movies, there's going to be a bunch of people that don't go to the movies. If you put out nothing but rom-coms, there's going to be a bunch of people that don't go to the movies. If you put out nothing but period pieces, there's going to be a bunch of people that don't go to the movies. And if all you put out is comic book movies or franchise films, yeah, there's going to be a bunch of people that don't go to the movies, but it works for every other part as well. It goes both ways. And then he makes this statement. Right up in the top couple lines. People will want to go and enjoy themselves or want to go and see something that moves them. I agree. Movies are meant to be emotional experiences, whether it's fear, laughter, contemplation, grief, like whatever. We go to movies for emotional experiences. I call them experiential events. And you're right. People want to go to see movies that move them. But here's the thing, Martin. I recently went down a rabbit hole. I don't know how and I don't know why on YouTube. And I went down this rabbit hole of watching people's online reactions to Game of Thrones, The Red Wedding. I have never seen anything in a Martin Scorsese movie move people the way that moved people. When you see rooms that fill with 20 people burst into tears and weeping and crying and screaming and whatever. Not many films, even my all-time favorite films, have rarely delivered an emotional experience or something that moved them on that level. I still remember when Opie died in Sons of Anarchy, man. That devastated me. That broke me in a way that a lot of films, certainly haven't before. Or House of the Dragon. Like when, I know not everybody's watched season 1, but a certain character riding a certain animal like dies, and I was like shocked and moved and in awe. Because here's the thing, Martin, who is a god, and I worship at the altar of Martin Scorsese, but you want to talk about movies that people will relate to and identify with and be moved by. Wolf of Wall Street is a brilliant, brilliant movie. But I'm going to tell you what, people can identify more and relate more to a Ms. Marvel about a young girl who find it awkward to be in high school and searching for identity and what her place in the world is. Yeah, turns out she has a superpower too, but then a rich billionaire dude who gets busted by the feds and goes to prison. They all have merit and they all work to deliver an emotional experience. And all movies deliver different kinds of emotional experiences. It does not elevate one over the other. One of the most moving scenes, but one of the most moving scenes I've ever seen, Infinity War. A CGI raccoon talking to a Norse god, and the Norse god talking about all the loss that he suffered in his life. And I'll tell you what, you can focus on the fact that it's a CGI raccoon talking to a Norse god. Yeah, you can do that. But that scene emotionally moved me. And it resonated. Like many Martin Scorsese movies do too. So yes, if you only make comic book movies, 100%, you're alienating a bunch of the audience. But you can say that about any other, if you only make any other kind of movie too. I want to talk about this thing as well. When he says this, the danger there is what it's doing to our culture. Because there are going to be generations now that think movies are only those. That's what movies are. That movies are only comic book movies. Point to me one year when we had 12 comic book movies come out. Point 1 year out to me that had 12 comic book movies come out. You can't. At least not big Hollywood wide release comic book films. Hasn't. Oh, I can point to you a number of years on how many cop movies came out, or crime movies came out, or murder mystery movies came out, or rom-coms came out. Yeah, you say there could be a generation. Guess what? People lived for 80 years never even thinking you could have comic book movies on screen. They're having their moment now, sure. But generations of people thought, oh, movies are everything but the things I like. John Schnepp, Rob, you and Schnepp we would talk on Heroes a bunch. We would talk about the fact that, you guys went through your teens, your 20s, your 30s, never thinking we could ever see this stuff on screen. There were generations of people who thought the movies were for everything but the things they liked. So yeah, comic book movies are having their time. If you look at the last 15 years, yeah, they're having their time right now. But even in that, there were decades that were predominantly dominated by certain subgenres of movies, but we never worried that people are going to look back and think that's the only thing that movies are. If all you made were cop movies, again, I see what he's saying. He's not wrong. You don't want a generation to look back and only think that this is what a movie is and it's only comic book films. Of course not. But Rob, that's not what's happening today. These are the ones that are succeeding a lot, sure, but that's the audience dictating that. So there's truth in things that Martin is saying. I just think that they're truths that are part of a revolving door that go both ways. And I think he's overlooking a couple of things here. And again, I say this with all reverence for Martin Scorsese. Rob, you heard the new comments being made by Martin about franchises and, comic book movies and things like that. What's your take on them?
Well, I think what he's really speaking about is the fact that the cultural landscape that we live in now is very different. Every decade's different from the decade before. And motion pictures as they stand now are different in terms of the cultural conversation than they were 10 years ago or 10 years before
Just
that.
as the 80s were different from the 70s, the 70s were different
Absolutely.
from the 60s.
And it used to be, and one of the big problems is the studios now are making movies for a global audience. Whereas 25 years ago, the global audience, the box office, you never had movies made most of their money domestically. Now, a lot of these big movies make most of their money foreign. So in order to travel foreign, they can only make certain films. Like comedies don't really travel well foreign because comedy is colloquial. It's local. And how can you expect one country that's very different than this country understand our humor? So big, huge blockbuster comedies don't get made as much anymore. And I think what he's worried about, like studios used to make, like Paramount would make over the course of a couple of years, you'd get a Footloose, a Fatal Attraction, and a Hunt for Red October, all from the same studio. And the studios would make all different kinds of movies to appeal to different kinds of audiences, but they weren't spending $200 million to make $1 billion worldwide. So the business has changed, and it's limited the kinds of movies that are getting made. The flip side of that, which I wish he would mention more, is that a lot of the kinds of movies that the studios used to make have moved over to television and streaming.
Yeah, that's a big point too.
We're getting all of these great dramas and really interesting stories being told in novelistic fashion on streaming services. I have to tell you, John, I watched a banger of a low-budget movie that came out of Ireland called Lola.
Oh,
Yeah,
I saw that.
Black and white movie. Did you watch it?
Yep.
Man, this movie was so clever about these two girls in the 40s that create a machine that they name after their dead mother, Lola, that can receive broadcasts from the future. It was a total science fiction movie, totally low budget. I was enthralled by this movie, and it was just as thrilling and maybe not just as thrilling and enthralling as a $200 million movie. But what I really liked about it was at scale, I was enchanted, charmed, and then I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And there is, like you always point out, a wide variety of movies being made if you choose to look for them.
Yes.
It's just that at the studio level, the movies that are dominating the cultural conversation and even our genre conversation, if I wanted to do a show about this movie Lola, nobody would tune in. I do a show about Ahsoka, thousands of people tune in and will tell me I'm wrong. And that's fine. But that's where we're at culturally. And I think that like you've always pointed out, there's a lot of movies being made. We're seeing movies from around the world come to America. It's just the cultural conversation tends to be dominated by certain movies when they come out. And yet there's a lot of great stuff coming. And the universe proved that people will turn up for a Barbie and an Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, a 3-hour biopic about the guy from created the atomic bomb, is almost going to make $1 billion. If you had asked me if I had that on my 2023 bingo card, John, I would have said no.
I would have said 5 or 6 at tops.
Maybe.
I would have been off by
and
a
that's
bunch.
only because it's Nolan. I didn't think Dunkirk would make $500 million, but it did. But the world will always surprise you.
But you know what? To your point, the studios have always been a supply and demand enterprise, right? What the audiences want, what the audiences are looking for, and what the audiences are paying for, that's what the studios will focus on. And like you said, that changes from decade to decade. I want to go back to the year before the pandemic, okay? The year before the pandemic, the last kind of regular year we had, right? I just pulled this up randomly. I said, well, Warner Brothers movies in 2018, right? Is it all franchises and comic book films? They did the film, by the way, you're talking about comedies, Rob, Tag, which I really liked.
Yep.
Tag, you don't have to have the screen up there, but they had Tag, they had the 15-17 to Paris, they had Game Night, which was a wonderful comedy, didn't do great at the box office. They did 12 Strong, they did The Mule, they did A Star Is Born, which of course was a remake, but whatever. They did They Shall Not Grow Old. They put out, that's just one studio in 1 year. Now, that year they also put out Tomb Raider, yeah. And they also put out Aquaman, yes. And they also put out Pacific Rim Uprising, but we won't. Nobody likes to talk about that. But they put out a mix. And this year, this has been one of the best years for comedies in ages. But the audience isn't going to them. And they're not going to support them. We've got a fairly big budget sci-fi movie coming out this week called The Creator, which right now, the people who've seen it are not just saying it could be one of or the best film of the year. They're saying it's one of the all-time great sci-fi classics. Already, we haven't seen it. It's tracking to make $15 to $20 million opening weekend. So, again, studios make these movies. But decade to decade, as Rob pointed out, the culture changes, what is trending changes. You know, they don't make as many buddy cop movies today as they did in 1980s or the 1990s. But that all happens in cycles, and it comes and it goes.
And also, you know, we have different forms of entertainment that we didn't have when, you know, Scorsese was coming up being a cineast in the 60s, and when he started editing, making stuff like Boxcar Bertha early in his career. It's just a different time. And people forget, you know, dude, I fell down, talk about rabbit holes. I fell down a rabbit hole about the most profound video game ever made. And it's the most profound scene. And it was a scene in Metal Gear Solid 2. When Raiden talks to this AI, and it's revealed to be that this AI has been behind everything. There's not even a real person behind it. And I'm like, I got so entranced by this conversation. I'm like, this is pretty profound stuff. And I'm like, this is some heady sci-fi AI commentary. And I never got to the end of Metal Gear Solid 2. I have the game. I love that franchise. And Kojima's the man. But I mean, wow. It's a video game.
All right, guys. Question is for you. What do you think about it? Again, I think there's truth in what Scorsese is saying here. I just think he's overlooking that it's truth that goes both ways, and there's some pretty major things he's kind of bypassing there. But whatever you feel about that, jump on down to the comments and let us know. All right, guys. We still have to talk about Target is reportedly pulling physical media from some of their locations. Also, the WGA and the studios have reached a tentative agreement. We're going to talk about that stuff and a whole bunch more. But first, we're going to take a second and thank one of the sponsors of today's episode of the John Campea Show podcast. Without a word of exaggeration, guys, the single most comfortable shoes I have ever walked in. Our friends at Vessi. Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of this video, Vessi. Now, like me, I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of Vessi, the shoe that claims to be incredibly comfortable and waterproof on top of that. Well, these claims are really interesting to me because as a Canadian who walked around in a lot of snow, and as somebody who likes to go camping and hiking with his wife on the weekends, there's nothing more uncomfortable and horrible than walking around in wet feet. So after receiving my first pair of Vessis and noticing how incredibly good looking the shoes are and how mind-boggling comfortable and flexible they are, the first thing I did was I took them into the backyard to put it to the supreme waterproof test and dipped my feet in my pool. Guys, my feet were bone dry, and like 20 seconds after having them in the pool and I touched them, the shoes themselves were also bone dry. Guys, seriously, these shoes are stupidly comfortable, they look great, and they absolutely lived up to the claim of being waterproof and keeping my feet dry. I absolutely love my Vessi shoes. So guys, if you want shoes that are good looking, are ridiculously comfortable, and on top of all that waterproof, you need to head to vessi.com/Campea and get yourselves a pair today. Go to vessi.com/Campea and get shoes for your best summer yet. And thank you to our friends at Vessi for giving me the most comfortable shoes I've ever had and for sponsoring this episode of the John Campea Show podcast. All right, guys, with that down, let's move on to this, shall we? You know, the topic, unfortunately, keeps coming up about the role of physical media today. And unfortunately, it's very rarely good news. You know, we've heard that, Disney was going to stop selling physical media at all in countries like Australia. We keep hearing about declining numbers. We keep talking about these manufacturers are now getting out of the business. Well, according to a story that's coming out of comicbook.com right now, apparently there are reports saying that there are Targets, which is like one of the largest chain retailers in the world, is actually pulling physical media, at least DVDs and Blu-rays, from certain locations. This is what they had to say. Some Target stores have reportedly stopped selling DVDs, Blu-rays, and CDs in their stores, removing displays in the part of the store where they sell their other physical media like books and vinyl records. This move is not entirely unexpected. The retailer, which had a significant amount of space dedicated to movies and music until 2021 or so, had been reducing the footprint of its disc sales for the last few years. Best Buy recently removed the home video section from their stores, with the only physical media still in most locations being records and video games. Now, Rob, I find it kind of interesting that this story is coming out now when, we've had recent reports of, speaking of Disney putting out some physical media collections and things like that. But it's almost like those are fake hope kind of stories. Like, because every time we actually look at real things, like manufacturers ceasing operations of building Blu-ray or DVD players, we hear about entire markets kind of losing out on it. Or now some of the major stores, one of the last bastions of physical media, now maybe taking some steps to reduce that footprint and everything. I mean, it goes back and forth, right? Sometimes we hear something that's a little bit promising, something that just kind of keeps the death knell ringing about physical media. Now, you and I are on two different sides of this, where like I am very much a digital streaming guy. You're very much a physical media guy, but we both agree about some of the pros and cons of both of them. And I want everybody to have what makes them happy. But you hear a story like this, does it surprise you? Do you think this is a larger trend coming? Do you think it's isolated? How do you see it?
I think unfortunately the sales of physical media has been dropping 20 to 25% every year. And to me, it's kind of a bummer because now we've reached a point where home technology is such that it can provide a theatrical-like experience depending on how much you want to spend on your equipment at home. But see, the thing that scares me the most about all this is if you go just by analytics, all anybody's going to end up putting up on streaming are things people watch.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our cinematic legacy, I've always said, John, that pop culture has a half-life of 20 years. And you go back 20 years, you think that the people are only going to watch half the movies that were made more than 20 years ago. And you go back 40 years, half of that. And the further you go back, people are less and less and less interested in movies that are old because they're interested in the pop culture of their day. And there's more movies all the time, getting more new things getting made that people have to keep up with as it is. And I worry about our cinematic legacy that in our analytics-driven future that we're going to have to all deal with and live in. If no one's watching, say, a black and white Laurel and Hardy movie, eventually it'll disappear.
Right.
And the thing about physical media is it allows people to collect what they like. And a lot of our cult titles, a lot of foreign titles, a lot of great documentaries are being preserved in physical media. And with the loss of physical media, there's going to be a lot of things that aren't available anymore. And that's what I worry about. And as long as our cinematic legacy is preserved, I'm happy about that. But at the end of the day, really, if no one's watching anything, is it worth preserving?
Well, and here's where it really becomes a problem. Whenever this discussion comes up about the decline of physical media and the fact that it is going away, the conversation gets turned to, should it go away? And that's not the topic of this story, is that it is going away.
It is going, right? No, it's going away.
It doesn't matter where it should or shouldn't. Here's one of the things that concerns me the most. And this only really came up for me where I kind of became cognizant of this in the last year or so, because there are people like me who erroneously thought, and I'm a digital guy. I don't collect physical media. I have no interest in collecting. I haven't done it in over a decade. But, there are people like me who thought that one of the great things about streaming is going to be that all this stuff can be online and it's going to be there and it's just going to sit on a hard drive. And when I want to access this, I'm going to be able to go out and find, if somebody tells me about this great movie from 1968, before my time, I can go online and find it. And I always thought, okay, so it's not really costing anything. But what we've seen in the last year or two is that the way this model is set up now, Rob, you were afraid if people didn't go watch it would disappear? The problem is the studios don't want people to go watch it. Because we've been seeing things like Warner Brothers, Disney, Netflix, others, like just removing content. Why? Because sitting there cost them licensing fees, so it was costing them money. And with residuals now coming into streaming, if people do watch it, it may not be bringing in any new subscribers. It may not be making us any money, but it's costing us money every time somebody watches it. It reminds me of that Vanilla Ice joke that he did in the one Adam Sandler comedy when they said, "Hey man, aren't you rich because of Ice Ice Baby?" He goes, "Nah man, I got to pay $5 every time somebody plays it on a Walkman or something." It literally is a situation where it starts costing the studio money to have it on their streaming service. And so they're just getting rid of it. And So Rob, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. Like, I agree. Like, physical media is going away. It's going to be streaming, and I prefer streaming. But one of the consequences is going to be that history, that stuff. Like, stuff isn't going to live in perpetuity online like it could. But the way the system is set up, where if people don't watch it, it's of no use to the studios. And if people do watch it, but it's not bringing in new subscribers, it's costing the studios money. And pretty soon streaming might just become what was out in the last 5 years. That is a problem. Even as a streaming guy, I got to say that's a problem.
Well, you know, I have to say that Warner Brothers has a division called Warner Archive, and it's overseen by a gentleman named George Feltenstein, who's probably the most knowledgeable person working in Hollywood today about older films, what exists where. Warner Archive this year, every month they've been cranking out incredible discs, restoring their rich history between Warner Brothers and the MGM movies they own, and nobody knows this. Like, Max should have a Warner Archive channel. I think young people, it would be hip to go back and watch like pre-code movies from the 30s, because people are going to be like, oh my God, they don't even know that they're there. And Warner Brothers is doing the Lord's work when it comes, and Warner Archive, their disc rates are incredible. The images they're giving you these things that you might never have seen. And they're very much worth watching, and no one knows they exist. And that's what bothers me, because they're doing it. They're doing this. And I would think that David Zaslav's being like, look what we're doing at Warner Archive. You can see these crazy movies that were made 100 years ago. Nobody's doing it.
Well, but even if David Zaslav did that, would there actually be a flood of people rushing over to watch it?
Well, it's how I think it's how, with like Barbenheimer, you're like, if you advertised it to people about the rich cinematic legacy, because some of those movies are wacky. I mean, you watch me like, oh my God, this is how people were back then. And if you couched it like that, I mean, and the different genres, whether it's film noir or weird comedies or bizarre musicals or Westerns, I mean, there's all this crazy stuff that you could sit in an afternoon and binge and just have a great time. Get high, take an edible.
I can tell you a strange, not bedfellow, strange hero to this. It wouldn't be so much that deep in the rabbit hole, but YouTube. Because for years now,
become the archive.
Well, years now, you have reactors.
Yes.
And they are watching classic movies. I can't even tell you how. And it's not like, well, they did it. They did. No, I am telling you, every month there's a new reactor coming out, and they're rewatching. Yes, a lot of it's franchise, but what happens inevitably is, well, now you got to check out these movies from the 80s. Now you got to see these from the 70s.
Yeah.
Oh, you got to see this. You got to see Casablanca. It gets it on, like, in the zeitgeist.
Yes, I completely.
So I'm not saying it solves the problem, but it helps.
Google is now tied in YouTube with what was Google Play, right? So now, like, when I buy a lot of movies on the Google Play Store, they're now accessible to me right on YouTube. Like, in my YouTube app, I can just open up my movies and watch it. That might become, who would have thought that? That might become the bastion for this. But anyway, guys, we actually got to move on from this. But guys, keep your eyes open on this and see what happens. Will more and more, I mean, they have been shrinking those sections. It is only recent movies you can normally find in there now, but are they going to start disappearing? We'll find out. All right, guys. With that down, let's move on to this, shall we? It finally happened. The WGA negotiating committee and the studios have reached a tentative agreement to actually end the writer's strike, not the actor strike. Not the actors are now a separate thing. Studios now have to turn their attention to the actors. I believe this will be a domino that falls fairly quickly. Then again, I even made a video about this. I was really convinced when both strikes started, that the actor strike would get fixed first, that the actors strike would be settled first. That didn't work out. The studios have been focused on getting the writers done, and it got done. And that is the topic of today's Mint Mobile hotline question of the day. Listen, guys, if you have a topic you'd like to hear us address on the show, go ahead and call it in anytime, 24/7, and hear your voice on our show by calling the hotline at 951-268-4259. Leave your message on our Mint Mobile hotline. We pick one or two out every day to address, and this one, again, is about the settlement of the WGA and studio strike. Check it out.
Yo, John and crew, the strike is over. So happy to wake up to the news. I am still very tired, so I'm going to go back to sleep and get a good night's rest. But just want to hear your thoughts on the the tentative strike being over, and what you think the tentative means as far as do they have to work out more details while they have this temporary deal placed. Thanks. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks a lot for calling that in. And yeah, listen, we said last week that we were expecting a deal done anytime. It became obvious that a deal was imminent when they started meeting 2 days in a row, then 3 days in a row, then 4 days in a row. Like, it became clear they were getting ready to put a deal. And then it really became obvious over the weekend when the studio heads left the negotiations, but the lawyers stayed. And we all said, well, that means they came to terms. Now the lawyers are working out the language. And we knew Yom Kippur was coming, which is a big deal in Hollywood, and that they were going to try to get a deal announced before the end of Sunday. And sure enough, last night, a deal got announced. Now, to address the first question there, because I want to talk about who came out as the winner, who came out as the loser, and all this kind of stuff, and that'll become more clear. But to address your one thing about, are there still some issues? Why are they calling this a tentative agreement? Well, here's why it's being called a tentative agreement. While the negotiators have come to an agreement with the studios in principle, there's a couple things that need to happen. Now, I'm going to oversimplify this, admittedly, but there are two key things that got to happen here now. All right. The leadership of the WGA East and the leadership of the WGA West, they now have to get this agreement that the negotiators got, and those two executive bodies have to approve it. But then it's still not over. So not only does the executives of the WGA East and the WGA West both have to approve the deal, once that's approved, it then has to go to the entire 11,500 members of the WGA to vote on it, to ratify it. So it's not that they're still working out details. They've got their principal agreement done. It's just got to go through the approval process now. And the nice thing here is why this is going to be a foregone conclusion is that, as far as I understand, the WGA doesn't need a big majority to ratify it. They only need 50% plus one. And I can guarantee you the approval is going to be over 95% because the writers have been itching to get back to work, as have the studios, as has everybody. So the reason they're calling it a tentative thing is because it's not official until the executives and then the membership as a whole ratify the deal. Then it's permanent, then it's in place. The nice thing, though, is that with this tentative deal in place, you're going to start hearing in the next 48 hours that probably showrunners are going to be told you can start staffing your rooms again, even before ratification happens, because I think everybody knows this is just a technicality, a procedural thing they're going to have to go through. They're not expecting any bumps along the way. So, and just like that Office story came out, now that people in the industry know that a deal has been reached, even before ratification, you're going to hear lips loosen up. So now you got people talking about the fact that we got an Office thing. I'm going to tell you what, in the next couple of days, starting today with The Office, and I think it's going to be over the next 5, 6, 7 days, you're going to hear a lot of stories come out because people are going to loosen up their lips, feeling a little bit more comfortable about talking about things going on that couldn't be talked about under the strike. Now, who won, who lost, who gave up the most, and all this kind of stuff. Matt Bellani, who is now today has the most respected newsletter out there for the entertainment industry called Puck. It kind of came out of nowhere. It's really established itself, and he's an industry veteran. They put out this thing, and I want to read an excerpt from what he wrote out last night at like 1 a.m. about this whole situation, and it's really quite interesting. So listen to this. According to sources in and around the final negotiations, no voices were raised and nobody stormed out of the room during the final stretch. But the studios made it clear that if there wasn't a deal by the end of Sunday, and preferably before the Yom Kippur sundown, they were planning to move on to SAG-AFTRA. So basically, it's like the studio's like, look, if we don't get a deal with you done by the end of Sunday, we're not negotiating with you anymore. We're going to move on and look at our other problem, which is SAG-AFTRA, and we're going to go focus on them. And then you're going to have to deal with whatever template we set up with them. So the WGA was frustrated too. The studios were frustrated anyway, but it became important. The in-person meetings of the past week gave way to Zoom meetings yesterday and today. The studio side complained that the guild didn't know how to close, that they kept coming back with more and more and more. The guild complained that they hit a wall on Thursday when the studios outright said they wouldn't negotiate on a couple of favorite issues. Both sides, under incredible pressure from their constituencies after a 146-day strike, recognized that the deadline was today or potentially weeks from now. And I want to tell you, I believe the early reports. If they didn't get a deal done this weekend, I don't think we would have seen the WGA strike end until 2024.
Yep.
Now, there was a little bit of controversy that the studios let it be known publicly. I think it was Friday. The word came out that they gave their last, best, final offer. The studios made up, we have made, this is it. This is as far as we're willing to go. Some people, that probably wasn't the smartest thing to do because some people in the WGA got their backs up about it. Now it looked like if they agreed to it that they were capitulating because more people were afraid about saving face than saving the industry, apparently. But that almost derailed things. But I guess it was good enough. I guess the deal was good enough. So that brings us on to the question about who won. And I like the way Matt puts this. He said this. So who won? Well, that's impossible to tell tonight. But the spin has already started. The guild is saying things like exceptional and meaningful gains language, though it hasn't quite elevated to the framing of historic yet. And while the studios are saying nothing, last thing they want is to disrupt an unpapered deal. It's clear that the top negotiators, Disney's Bob Iger, NBC Universal's Don Langley, Netflix's Ted Sarandos, and Warner Brothers Discovery's David Zaslav felt a sense of urgency, a sense that arguably they should have felt months ago. So, look, right from the beginning, we said this is going to end when everybody walks away a little bit unhappy. Everybody's going to have to understand that neither side is going to get everything they want. You're going to have to give up on some things. And I am thrilled. I am. I'm thrilled that this deal has gotten done. We're going to get things developing again. I think this week you're going to see showrunners start staffing their rooms again. I think you're going to see writers getting back on writing their scripts and all that kind of stuff. Again, nothing too official until it's ratified, but that's going to come quickly, I think. But Rob, I got to tell you, it also frustrates me. It frustrates me. Because in the 146 days of the strike, and I got plenty of frustration for the frickin' studios and for the WGA. They met in the same room together for a grand total of 9 days. In a 146-day strike, they met in the same room together for a grand total of 9 days. And I was talking to Jonathan before we started, and I said, it's not a coincidence that when they sat in the room for 5 days straight, which was more than all the previous 140 days that they had sat in the same room together, it's not surprising that, oh, you mean when we actually sit in a room committed to getting a deal done for 5 days straight, we got a deal done? Quel surprise. How shocking. Why the fuck didn't you guys do this in week 1?
Or before the strike started.
Or, one of my biggest pieces of frustration, Rob, is you know why the DGA didn't go on strike? Because I was talking to a DGA member, says, because we've been talking with them behind the scenes for over a year before the deadline. Whereas SAG and the WGA didn't start talking to them till within about 2 weeks of the deadline. Why not before the strike had happened? And why did it take you 146 days to sit in the same room? Oh, and by the way, studios and WGA, clearly you both gave up some things. Why not just come into the room and actually plainly, I get, John, you don't understand, John. You don't understand the art of the deal. Fuck that. Be plain. Just go in and say, look, here's what's important to us. Here's some things that are kind of important to us we'd like to have if we can figure out a way to compromise, but we're not willing to die on this hill. Because at the end of the day, the WGA had to go in there and say, there are certain things that the WGA said at the beginning, we won't surrender this, that they surrendered on. And there are things that the studio said at the beginning, we won't surrender this, and they surrender. Just sit down together, start negotiating. And it pisses me off that they went months without talking to each other. Because guess what? You know what I learned in negotiations, Rob? If there's an issue you can't budge on, and an issue that the other side can't budge on, you know what? Negotiate the other stuff anyway. Because quite often when you negotiate on the other points, that solutions start to present themselves. But if you're not in the same fucking room together and looking at each other across the table and dialoguing it out, no solutions present themselves. So 2 things I want to point out. It's not a coincidence that they got the deal done when they actually sat in the same room for 5 days straight. Also, why the hell wasn't Bob Iger, Dave Zaslav, Ted Sandros, why weren't they in the room earlier? Because that's when shit got real, is when the actual studio heads got involved and not just their reps. Anyway, super thrilled that a deal got done. I think when we get the full details coming out, I honestly think we're all going to look at it and go, that kind of makes sense, which makes me wonder why some of the smartest people in the world couldn't have come to this in the third week, or like you said, Rob, before it. Anyway, I'm happy. I know it doesn't sound like I'm happy, but I am happy. Rob, clearly the studios and the WGA were both coming under heavy pressure from their individual constituencies. A deal got done. What do you think about what we're hearing so far? How good is this good news that it's there? And then how quickly do you think maybe they're going to be able to get the actor strike settled too?
Well, I'm really curious to see what deals they made, because there's real concerns when it comes to the future of all creative arts and how AI, is going to affect writing. You have people like George R.R. Martin have brought a lawsuit against OpenAI, the company that's behind ChatGPT and Midjourney and all this. It's going to be very interesting to see how the WGA has protected themselves moving forward. I always think that these deals are made always behind the 8 ball, when people they're not thinking 10 years ahead. And I understand they have to think, well, we've only can think 3 years ahead. And I'm like, no, it's a future that's going to be very different than the present we live in today. But I'm curious to see that. I'm glad they did this now, because the whole business is changing. The world is changing. Look at the stock prices of Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount. They need their core businesses to be running. Amazon, Apple are different, but it's nice to see the industry moving forward, that people are going back to work, and we're going to get what we love, so we can talk about movies and movie news and all of our favorite things in the world. I'm just happy to see this moving forward. I'm curious to see what they've done. And John, what they've done here is going to affect what SAG does as well.
Yeah, on certain issues. On
certain issues. But I mean, in terms of labor, look, we always want, I think the really important thing is when it comes to the United States, labor has always been a force to be reckoned with, and people who work hard need to be compensated and be able to live well. And, the last thing in the world corporations want to do is pay for labor.
One quick point, because you mentioned AI is a big thing in ChatGPT. It was reported today, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, Amazon is spending $4 billion on a direct competitor to ChatGPT. The same people who were in the room for this writer's strike. So I'm very curious about the timing of that.
I mean, nobody disagrees that the future of things like ChatGPT, Google has a version called Bard.
And many other applications in writing.
Microsoft has a version of it as well. I mean, that is going to be a big thing for online stuff moving forward. Amazon being a tech giant as well. They're going to be into that. Now, we got some details. I'm not going to bring this up on screen, but I'll read this through. So more details will come this week, but we've confirmed from sources that the lead negotiators for the WGA achieved broad protections against AI, which is one of the issues I was 100% on the WGA side. That is protections from AI is 100% something they had to get, and it sounds like they were able to get that. Though the studios kept certain rights to experiment, determining that contract language was actually what stretched in the final negotiations on Sunday. The writers also got certain levels of minimum staffing based on the number of episodes of a TV show. That was a tricky one, because what do you do with like some of the best shows on TV, like Taylor Sheridan's, where he writes them by himself? Is he going to be forced to hire 8 or 9 writers? But apparently they were able to make some progress on that, so that sounds good. Though they didn't get the guaranteed level or numbers that the WGA wanted. Again, it's compromise. You're going to get some of what you want. You're not going to get everything what you want. They didn't get a strike recognition clause, though, which would have allowed the WGA to respect other unions' picket lines. So the WGA was wanting to get a clause put in that said, hey, let's say IATSE goes on strike. We want the right to not go to work and respect their strike. And it's like, no, like we're making a deal with you. You honor the deal we make. Otherwise, we're going to find clauses for, hey, we know everything's fine, but we don't want to pay you because somebody else isn't paying somebody else. So that was never going to happen. So they didn't get that. And on the all-important transparency issue, it's still unclear how significant gains there were. We had heard, Rob, that, the writers don't get any information about numbers and analytics on streaming platforms. We heard in that one offer that the studios made public that they would quarterly give reports to certain reps, but they still wanted to maintain the privacy of their stuff. So it sounded like they made a little bit of progress on that. The new residual scheme contemplates bonuses based on consumption. The more a title is watched, the higher the residual. Again, I don't know if that's the one they actually ended up on. That's what they were asking for. And that's a big deal. But what the bonuses benchmarks are and how much access the guild will have to data is not clear. They're going to follow up on the issue. So it sounds like exactly the way negotiations should go. Both sides got some of the things they wanted. Both sides didn't get everything they wanted. And hopefully they got a working deal. Is there any point in here that stands out to you as like maybe being, you know, the Excalibur and the stone, like the main thing? Like, what do you think maybe the final hurdle they had to get over was? Do you think it was AI? Do you think it was residuals? Do you think it was writers in the contract?
I think it's a combination of things. I think the fact that I think what the Writers Guild really wants overall is the opportunity, if this sounds strange to say, but to do their best work. You know, you want to be able to have enough people to pull off making the shows you want to make, and you want the writers involved. Like, you know, you had writers that would, I have friends that are TV writers. If their show was shooting in Canada when their episode shot, they would go and watch their episode being filmed. And if they needed to weigh in on that, they could. And all of those things were being taken away. And I think that ultimately what you want is the quality of the product to be as good as it can be, because that's what all that remains is the final version. And if they're not being given the time, and they're not being given the tools, and they're not being given the talent they need to create something that's worth creating, I think that's a problem, because that's the only way you get another job, is to make sure that the work that you're doing is great work. And you want to get paid, but at the end of the day, no one becomes a writer or goes into the arts just because they want to get rich. They want to create great work, because
I don't know that's. I think it's both and. I think they want to create great work and they want to get rich.
But the only way you can get rich is if your work is great and you have a track record. So what's happening is everyone's work is being undermined, and that prevents them from getting rich because they don't get the jobs they deserve.
You know, this is funny because that's why. I mean, there are like issues of residuals and stuff like that. I've kind of not agreed with the WGA.
That's a different issue.
The reason I've agreed with the WGA on most of the other things is because ultimately I think if the studios would look at what the WGA was asking for, and I've said this many times, soberly, they would see that what the WGA is asking for is actually going to be good for the studios too, right? And it sounds like those key things were things they made progress on. Again, I'm sure details are going to come out more over the coming days, and we'll see. All right. Guys, with that all down, we're now going to move over and start taking questions from our YouTube channel members. But before we get to that, we're going to take another moment here and thank another sponsor of today's episode of the John Campea Show podcast, my mobile service provider, and they should be yours, Mint Mobile. Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of today's video, Mint Mobile. Signing your life away to a big wireless provider is kind of like being trapped on a roller coaster from hell. Sure, it looks like fun at first. They probably even threw in a free phone, but now you can't get off. Month after month of insane bills and unexpected thrills, like overages and surprise fees. If that sounds like your current big wireless plan, it's time to get off the ride with Mint Mobile. For a limited time, wireless plans from Mint Mobile are just $15 a month. That's unlimited talk, text, and data for just $15 a month. You guys know before I came to Mint Mobile, I was paying triple what I am paying now on the standard big wireless plan, and I will never go back. All plans come with unlimited talk, text, and high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. To get your new unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped right to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/Campea. That's mintmobile.com/Campea. Cut your wireless bill to just $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Campea. And thank you to our friends at Mint Mobile for sponsoring this episode of the John Campea Show podcast. All right, guys, with that down, let's get on over and start taking some questions from our YouTube channel members. Every day we ask our great group of supporters, our YouTube channel members, to give us some topics they'd like to hear us discuss, and we get through as many as we can every day. So, Jonathan, what do we got up first?
All right, Brian's YouTube channel says, John, don't beat up on Expendables 3 too much. Everyone in my showing loved it. P.S. I was the only one in the showing.
I'm going to assume you meant Expendables 4.
Yeah, he
Man,
said 3 before.
See, maybe that's it. Maybe you saw the wrong movie. Because listen, the beautiful thing about movies is that it all hits us in different ways. And if you're somebody that enjoyed Expendables 4, that's awesome. I celebrate that. I just thought personally it was one of the worst films ever made by a Hollywood studio. I just thought it was absolute, utter garbage. And I say that as somebody who has liked the franchise, and I really like Sly, and I love Jason Statham, and Randy Couture, obviously, but it was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But if you saw it alone and you really liked it, that's awesome. I'm just trying to talk you out of your love for it. That's the beautiful thing about art, man. Did you get a chance to see Expendables 4?
Hell no.
I want you to see it so bad.
It made a whopping $8 million this weekend.
I will tell you this, though.
Oh, yeah, it made $8 million this
Watching
weekend.
everybody's responses, including your response to Expendables 4 on the internet, I think is wildly more entertaining than probably watching that movie.
I would still just love to hear what you thought about it. I really, really would. All right, what's next?
Amin writes, how surprised are you that the writers were able to get a deal done before the actors? Let's hope SAG gets their deal within the next week or so as well. Fingers crossed.
I'll tell you what, I mean, very surprised. Again, a couple of months ago, when the actor strike started, I literally made, I'm going to call myself out on this. I made an editorial video that said why the actor strike will get settled before the writer strike. And I believe in all the principles that I laid out there. Now, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it kind of became clear that the studio was focusing their efforts on the WGA strike. And at that point, we kind of figured that that one would get done first. But yeah, overall, so I'm not surprised now, but overall, very surprised. I 100% believe that they were going to get the actor, because if they got the actor strike done, movies could go back into production. You didn't need the writers to not be on strike for movies to go back in production. Like movies like Deadpool 3 that are already halfway done shooting. They can get the actors back on set, get everything rolling, all that kind of stuff. So I really thought the studios were going to focus their attention on the SAG strike. They didn't. So I'm surprised. Robert, were you surprised by this too, or does this make sense?
No, it makes sense because it's been going on a lot longer than the SAG strike. Yeah. And I think that, we had to get writers started. Writers got to get going because you've got to start writing TV, and it gives you a little bit more time before you get to the actors anyway, because things have to be written before the actors can be in them. So they can concentrate, get those writers working, and get those scripts ready to go so you can start a new season of whatever it is you're going to start when the actors strike is resolved. So you got to have scripts before you can have actors working.
The nice thing, too, is that a situation like with Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool 3, now he can start doing those punch-ups to the script. And then, when the actors do come back, they're no longer hamstrung.
Right.
Well, we can't do any writing, but we can act, but we can't make any changes. So at least it'll be full. So
yeah, well, check this out here. So here's an immediate reaction. Look at this. That Dancing with the Stars, which was going to delay, it's now official. Now that they've announced that a deal's been signed, they're just going to go ahead and launch the show. Can I just say this is another, I got really frustrated with how the WGA acted towards talk shows that wanted to get up and running again. Dancing with the Stars, which is a show I've never watched once in my life, and I plan to keep it that way. If it's for you, awesome. Clearly not for me. But they have a staff of 500 people on Dancing with the Stars. And they had one WGA writer that was writing some teleprompter stuff. 500 people whose jobs and livelihoods were being held up because of one person on staff. Look, whatever. I'm not going to go into the debates of it, but the very fact that, then Mira Sorvino, Academy Award winner Mira Sorvino, she had people in the unions attacking her because she was going to be on the show, saying your dead father would be disgusted by you.
Yeah,
bringing up dead for what?
Oh, geez.
For what? By the way. Mira was not a member of the WGA, and SAG, Dancing with the Stars, is not a SAG-struck show. So she was perfectly within the rules to do it. And here's part of the thing that frustrated me a lot during it, Rob, especially with the talk show stuff. I got really frustrated by the hypocrisy, because when the WGA strike started and the SAG wasn't on strike, I didn't hear anybody complaining about actors going and filming their movies. Because like I said, tons of movies are still in production. TV shows are still in production. Nobody said, how dare you work when we're on strike? But But all the other people, they're just cannon fodder. All those 500 other people who worked on that show, whose livelihoods depended on that show going to air. Oh, you're second-class citizens. You're not as important. You're not real people. I got really frustrated with the WGA over that kind of stuff in there. But apparently, Dancing with the Stars is going to come back right away, which tells me probably the talk shows are going to be back really, really soon, and tells me they're going to get everything up and running pretty fast. I think the WGA is going to probably fast track getting membership ratification on this as fast as they can, because they want to get everybody back to work, I think. All right, what's next?
We've got Spencer's mother who writes, I can't believe Nick Chubb's only tore his MCL. I thought for sure that was career-ending injury last week. Amazing what the human body can endure. Plus a PSA for today. Hug a Broncos fan. They need it.
So, forget whether you're a sports fan or not, the Nick Chubb injury was one of the, not as bad as Joe Theismann, but that's one of the most horrific injuries I've ever seen. Or Anderson Silva's. Remember Anderson Silva's leg break?
Or Paul George.
That was one of the craziest.
Paul George, did you ever see that one?
No, I don't even know who Paul George is.
The basketball player where he ran into the. Oh, never mind.
No,
don't
never saw
look it
it.
up. Where his bone is popping out.
But that's how Joe Theismann, like his bone was literally coming out. I was like, anyway, but the Nick Chubb thing was a very disturbing thing to see. Really happy to hear that, because a lot of people were worried he couldn't have a career anymore going up. And yeah, the Denver Broncos got beat by 50 points. They played the Miami Dolphins, who for the first time in my life, I've never seen a football game with one team getting 70 points. Never heard of it. Never seen it before. I don't know if that is the record or not. I honestly don't know, but I've never seen it. Denver Broncos got violated, man.
Did the Dolphins even try to let up in that game? I didn't see it. I didn't hear about it.
I think, well, they put in their backup quarterback at some point.
Okay.
Like Tua came out of the game. Anyway, all right, what's next?
All right, we've got Mighty Tank, who writes, had a chance to rewatch John Q over the weekend, and man, what a powerful performance from Denzel. Definitely hit harder as an adult.
I honestly think it might be his most underrated film. You never hear anybody talking about that one, but it was super relevant. It's relevant today. And some might argue it's even more relevant today. And you're right, point to one movie that will say, Denzel was okay in that, not so good. I mean, Denzel was always Denzel, but I mean, I think that's his most underrated movie. Did you see John Q?
Oh yeah, I really liked it. I mean, it's funny. Denzel Washington never phones it in, and he's got I think he's got a great nose for the movies that he should be in. And I think that movie, it's funny you say that. I never hear anything about that film, ever.
No one ever brings it up.
Ever.
By the way, a lot of people keep forgetting or don't know that John David Washington, star of the new The Creator movie coming out, that's Denzel's son.
Yep.
Gets it off his head. But you can tell, too, when he talks. Like, oh, my God, yeah, he grew up in a house with Denzel Washington talking, because he talks just like his dad. All right, what's next?
CJ Rebirth writes, did you guys ever see a car in a movie and go, I want to own that? For me, over the years, it's been the DeLorean, a Camaro like Bumblebee, Paul Walker's Nissan Skyline from Fast and Furious 2, and Herbie the Volkswagen Bug.
I've often seen cars. I go, oh, I would love to drive that. But they're always cars that aren't the star of the movie cars. You know what I mean? Like I see cars like, that looks pretty sick and awesome. But I'm not a car guy. I'm really not. I know most of my friends always grew up being really big car heads and stuff like that. I'm really not. Did you have a dream?
Dude, the first thing that always pops into my mind is James Bond's white Lotus Esprit that turns into a submarine in Spy Who Loved Me. 1977 Spy Who Loved Me. That's my car. If I could have any car, a car that turns into I don't know how I would use it out here, but if I could have one car, that would be the car. It fires missiles too.
I had a friend that bought the Bullet, like an exact replica of the Bullet. That green.
Oh yeah, the Mustang.
Mustang.
Yeah. That came out like 10 years ago. You could get that exact car.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Yeah, he has an original from that model.
Okay. Yeah.
I just want the Matt Reeves Batmobile.
I'll tell you a car I want, and it wasn't from a movie. This is going to sound really dumb. Stone Cold Steve Austin had a kind of a talk show for a while where he'd have a guest on. Do you remember what the name of the show was?
It was, wow. No, I don't.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it either.
Cut to you.
But his guest this one week was one of the guys from the Impractical Jokers.
Oh, right.
And he came in, and they're doing their talk in a car, this really cool looking car. They're driving around town. Steve Austin's driving it, whatever. And then they go down to the beach in Santa Monica, and he drives the car with the top down right into the water, and the car becomes a boat. And they're just laughing, going like, I want that. That's
Yeah.
what I want. I think that would be it may not be a submarine, but a car that turns, just drive it right into the water, becomes your boat. I want that car.
But hold up. John David Washington is Denzel Washington's son?
Catch up.
Yes.
We finished talking about that about 5 minutes ago.
But I had no idea.
You
I just
didn't
was
know?
trying to confirm. I had no idea. I was like,
You thought I was lying to you? You had to confirm it after I said
it just processed in my head because like the
I can't
Washington.
even remember what we talked about as far back as what you just catch up to.
And then I was like, I like him a lot. Like from everything I've
He's
seen,
good. Yeah.
he's
You know,
really
I first
good.
really discovered him in Dwayne The Rock Johnson's Ballers. I really liked him in that.
Wow, my mind's blown. I can't believe I didn't know that.
All right, what's next?
All right. Hey, all, it's over. I feel like Gamora when Thanos snaps asking, what did it cost?
Yeah.
Referring to the strikes, everything. Hope everyone can pay rent on time. Much love.
Yeah, and I'm just waiting for Ray to go, wait a minute.
There's a strike?
The Office is coming back?
Come on, just one question over. While you guys were blabbing about your dream cars, I was looking up facts.
I'm
looking up
just to make sure.
information.
I'm
Batmobile.
so wrong on facts that I
I'm
had
doing
to
my
look it up.
job.
Yeah. So okay.
I
Sorry.
forgot what the question was.
Sorry, we're talking on a talk show, Ray. I'll re-ask it. Oh, just to like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
What? No, and in all honesty, again, it's great news, but my frustration is, why couldn't grown adults sit in a room and get this done in a week or two?
Because it's Hollywood, and who's an adult?
Yeah, you're not wrong.
You know what? You just
You're
nailed
not
it.
wrong.
I don't imagine the situation like
I'm
let's say
kidding. I
were the
kid.
people speaking against Drew Barrymore some of her writers or what or let's
So
say
she only had like one writer. One
like
or
coming
two.
back to work if someone spoke up against you while you were trying to do something like that would be a weird situation to get into.
It's a weird situation, but it
is.
was overblown.
Yeah, it was massively overblown.
And also, I read an article that was in Variety about how, I think I sent it to you, about how talk shows had to come back based on the contracts they had in terms of, because of syndication and other deals they had. So in her case, I think it was probably she didn't have a choice.
Yeah,
She
I still remember after they announced that Drew Barrymore decided not to bring the show back. I remember I didn't say it on the show, but I came and I said to Jonathan and I were talking about it. I said, well, let this be a lesson to all you kids. Online bullying works. Want to get what you want? Online bully somebody.
I can't believe people would ever dare to go after poor Drew.
The new America.
Anyway, all right, what's next?
Hey crew, we finally made it. 146 days later, we made it to the finish line. Thank you guys so much for what you do. I imagine making the show the past 4 months couldn't have been easy, and we all very much appreciate you. Cheers. Get ready for the absurd influx of movie news we're about to get.
Movie and TV news is about to get pretty, there's going to be a flood of it coming in because there's literally months of news that has been building up and building up and building up. And even like, again, a lot of stuff happens months before it ever gets reported. So that means there's a whole bunch of stuff that probably happened and deals that got signed and projects that got planned 5, 6, 7 months ago that we never heard about. And now we're going to start hearing about it. So yes, I'm very glad, but it's not really over until the actors also get their deal done, right? Nothing ain't going to shoot without any actors. So we
I'm
need to get
hoping
that
2
deal done
weeks,
next.
but maybe that's naivete.
You know what? I would say 2 weeks. I think now that a framework has been created surrounding residuals, residuals is one, not the only one, but one of the bigger hurdles that the SAG thing. And now that a framework's been agreed upon, at least the WGA, I think that'll get things moving with SAG a little quicker. So here, I mean, that's just me being optimistic though. All right, what's next?
All right, we got Sarujan, who writes, I completed season 1 of The Bear yesterday, and wow, episode 7 might be one of the best episodes of a series I ever saw. Wait till you get to season 2.
Yeah, season 2 is better than season 1. It's crazy to say that with how good season 1 is, but yeah, it's absolutely incredible. All right, guys. And that's all the time we've got for today's episode of the John Campea Show podcast. Thank you so much for being here, making the show part of your day. Big special thank you to our YouTube channel members for being members and for sending in those topics. Don't forget, we ask our channel members for topics every single day, so make sure you come back and give us some more tomorrow. So for everybody in the room, Ray Ora, Jonathan Boyko,
Yo.
Robert Meyer Burnett, most importantly, thank you to you guys. My name's John Campea, and until next time, John David Washington is Denzel's son.
Woo.
Squirt, squirt.